welcome to Behind the Ballet. I'm Elizabeth Kaye, and today I'll be telling you about a divine, impassioned ballet, Romeo and Juliet. This glorious work was created for Britain's Royal Ballet in 1965 and choreographed by Kenneth Macmillan, who would go on to be director of the Royal Ballet and artistic associate of American Ballet Theatre. To explain how Macmillan attained his exalted place in the ballet world, I'd like to tell you a bit about British ballet, from which Macmillan arose and permanently changed. One of the many things this history affirms is that while ballet tends to be viewed as an art that exists at a distance from what we call the real world, it's often shaped and altered by events that have nothing to do with dance. In the case of British ballet, its founding event is war. At the start of the 20th century, there was no British ballet. What ignited it occurred in June 1911 during celebrations for the coronation of King George V, when the visionary Russian impresario Serge Diaghilev brought his Ballet Russe to the Royal Opera House at Covent Garden. The Ballet Russe brimmed with original, eye-catching modernist works, danced by, among others, Vaslav Nijinsky and Anna Pavlova, who were justifiably remembered as two of ballet's most dazzling and iconic stars. The Ballet Russe did not simply please its audiences. It captivated them and convinced them of something they had not previously believed, that ballet is an essential art. The Ballet Russe returned to London in 1912 and 1913. And then there was no more ballet because World War I intervened. That brutal war greatly affected the man who would become the founding force of British ballet. John Maynard Keynes is more commonly heralded as the foremost economist of the 20th century, but he was also a lover of the arts and of the Ballet Russe in particular. So much so that he married one of the company's leading ballerinas, Lydia Lepokova. Keynes was deeply attached to memories of the idyllic life he led before the war, when those in his intellectual circle were devoted to the pursuits of knowledge and art. But as the war raged, Keynes saw his beloved civilized world crumble and vanish. When the war finally ended in 1918, he felt that what had been lost was the gentleness of life, and he believed that ballet's supreme grace and graciousness were the embodiment of that lost Eden. So he determined to foster ballet in Britain, but it proved an uphill climb. It took Diaghilev's sudden death in 1929 to provide the impetus and the funds to establish the first British ballet group, the Camargo Society, named for Marie Anne Camargo, who danced in the 1700s and was the first ballerina to perform incredible technical feats. One of the Camargo Society's founding members was a former dancer in Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. Her birth name was Idris Stanis, but Diaghilev insisted on Frenchifying the names of his dancers, and so Idris Stanis became Lynette de Valois. De Valois shared Keynes' yearning for the vanished time before the war. Like him, she saw ballet as a beacon, with standards that were, as she put it, tied to the point of idealism. In 1931, she founded the Vic Wells Ballet, which would become the Sadler Wells Ballet and finally the Royal Ballet. And she would preside over these companies, where she was known respectfully and fearfully as Madame, for 32 years. In 1934, de Valois hired her first in-house choreographer, a young dancer and aspiring choreographer named Frederick Ashton, who would become, along with Macmillan, Britain's most outstanding choreographers. Like Keynes and Lynette de Valois, Ashton mourned for the gentler pre-war past. Together, he and de Valois created a uniquely English style of dance. It was elegant, lyrical, pure dance with light, fleet footwork and replete with the graciousness they longed for. The word line in ballet refers to the shapes a dancer's body creates, and the lines Ashton created are as distinct and finely drawn as etchings on glass. But then came World War II, with its shortages of blue for point shoes, silk for tights, and most importantly, a shortage of male dancers who went to war, as Ashton also did. As the bombs fell during the Blitz, killing 30,000 citizens in London alone, ballet's ability to enchant and uplift its audiences meant that by popular demand, dancers gave as many as 6 performances a day. Before the war, ballet had been strictly for the high-born tiara set, but in wartime it became beloved by people of every class. These were days when 100 flying bombs would hit London each day, and as the dancers performed, they and the audience would hear bombs dropping close by. When the bomb came, a sign in front of the footlights would light up. The words on it were "Air Raid," and then, at last, all clear. But the dancers followed the classic British dictum, keep calm and carry on. And as they did, they became beloved symbols of the British spirit. The war ended in 1945, and by the time Ashton created his exquisite ballet Cinderella in 1948, ballet stood at the center of British public life. But the world was changing, and once again, ballet would be profoundly affected by events that had nothing to do with dance. In Britain, the Suez Crisis of 1956 sapped public faith in the government and left citizens deeply suspicious of the status quo. Rebellion was in the air, and in the British theater, John Osborne's gritty, realistic play, Look Back in Anger, spawned the phrase angry young men to characterize Osborne and others of his generation who favored harsh realism and spurned the escapist theater that prevailed before. This had a huge influence on the young dancer Kenneth Macmillan, who was bowled over by Look Back in Anger's raw emotion and unvarnished reality. He began to perceive what would be his lifelong calling, to bring that same grittiness and harsh realism to ballet. Macmillan, born in Scotland in 1929, was 25 years younger than Frederick Ashton and had not a trace of longing for the past. All of his creative instincts were geared toward the future. His ballets would become the most successful 20th century offerings of the story ballet. Like choreographers who'd come before him, he adapted stories from literature and history and upheld ballet's tradition of presenting sumptuous spectacle set in a bygone age. But he also reinvented the 19th century narrative ballet for a contemporary audience that was drawn as he was to hard-edged realism and primed for tales of passion, sex, and drama, rather than stories based on myths and fantasy and chivalry. As a result, he brought neurosis and psychological drama to the rarefied world of ballet. This was a massive break from the 19th century ballets, whether it be the romantic ballet Giselle or the classical Swan Lake. In those works, the insistent, uplifting message was that love is stronger than evil and stronger than death. In Macmillan's ballets, the characters love with a frenzied, desperate passion, but love cannot save them. These ballets are tragedies in which the protagonists are subject to forces they did not create and cannot control. For Romeo and Juliet, that force is the loathing of their families, one for the other. And so, despite the abundant love they feel for each other, the loathing wins out and ultimately dooms them. Macmillan structured Romeo and Juliet around 4 pas de deux, a pas de deux being a dance of two, those heart-stirring dances of two lovers through which they express in movement the emotions roiling through their minds and souls. Macmillan saw the pas de deux in a distinct way. It was for him like a jewel in the center of a ring, a jewel surrounded by smaller stones framing the jewel to enhance its prominence. In Romeo and Juliet, the initial pas de deux occurs when Romeo first sees Juliet and makes himself known to her. The setting is a lavish ball given by Juliet's family, the Capulets. Romeo belongs to the Montague family, who are at war with the Capulets. He and his friends have snuck into the ball, and he's obscuring his identity by wearing a mask and standing in a darkened corner of the ballroom. But when he sees Juliet, he leaves the shadows, having been drawn to her magnetically. They stand before each other, totally still. This stillness is something Macmillan will employ at other key moments in the ballet. And stillness is an extremely powerful device in an art that is all about movement. Here in the ballroom, Romeo and Juliet do not simply gaze at one another. They behold each other. She does not know who Romeo is. She's unaware that he belongs to the family with whom her own family is warring. She knows only that a current is coursing through her mind and body that she has never experienced before. As for Romeo, previously he's been a playful, even careless flirt, but now his heart is engaged, and their pas de deux begins. Rudolf Nureyev once told me that a pas de deux is a conversation between two dancers, and as these two converse for the very first time, we see the emotions that are overtaking them. But because so many powerful people and establishment forces will seek to keep them apart, these sweet moments of the discovery of love are also the moments that set their tragedy into motion. The next pas de deux comes right after the ball. When this pas de deux begins, Juliet is on her balcony, thinking dreamily of Romeo, and suddenly he is there. Here again, we have that stillness as they gaze at each other from a distance. Romeo beckons her to leave the balcony and join him. Now, together and totally alone, they stand beside each other, stock still again. Then Juliet takes Romeo's hand and places it on her breast so he can feel her beating heart. Here their dancing is more abandoned than it was in the ballroom, as they declare their love, declarations culminating in Juliet's first kiss. In this lush, gorgeous pas de deux, the dancers must navigate complex progressions of steps and acrobatic lifts with such grace and seeming ease that you would never know that what they are doing is nearly impossible. But that is what dancers must do. Their art requires them to perform these extraordinarily difficult feats and make them seem effortless. When you dance Romeo or Juliet, you have to trust that no matter how deeply you go into the emotion of the ballet, your partner will be there to match you. That trust is essential in the bedroom pas de deux. At this point in the story, Romeo and Juliet were secretly married the day before. But afterwards, Romeo was drawn into a sword fight with Juliet's cousin, and he killed him. Romeo and Juliet spent the night together, but now, in the morning, Romeo knows he must flee Verona, or he'll be arrested or worse, but Juliet is desperate to keep him there with her. In this tumultuous pas de deux, they fight, they mourn, but in the end he leaves, and after he goes, Juliet, in a quandary about what to do, sits at the edge of her bed, staring straight ahead, totally still once more, while the music swells with Romeo's theme. Now she must find a way to outwit her parents, who expect her to marry Paris, a man who is wealthy, upper class, and repellent to her. She seeks out Friar Lawrence, who gives her a liquid potion that will make her appear to be dead. The friar promises to alert Romeo to her fake death so he can join her in the burial crypt, where, when she awakens, they can run off together. But the message never reaches Romeo. Instead, he believes that Juliet is dead. Their final pas de deux takes place in the crypt, where the seemingly dead Juliet lies. Romeo finds her, and in shock and devastation, he drags her apparently lifeless body around the crypt, lifting her, shaking her, trying to make her respond. For the dancer portraying Romeo, this desperate grappling requires him to walk an artistic tightrope as he fully immerses himself in Romeo's wild grief without ever going so far that the scene descends into parody. Finally defeated, he opens a vial of poison and drinks it. Just after Romeo expires, Juliet awakes. When she sees Romeo lying there, she has a final moment of joy before realizing he is dead. Grief-ridden and hopeless, she stabs herself with Romeo's dagger. As the life leaves her body, she reaches for his hand and holds it for a moment. Then she too is gone. Here, there will be no sweet reuniting in the afterlife. They are just dead. Their young lives, their love, their dreams, their hopes, all dashed and wasted. This is tragedy, and tragedy affords no redemption. There is only what might have been and what will never be. In Romeo and Juliet, Macmillan's 4 exquisite pas de deux, those enthralling, physically complex, and deeply emotional dances of two, teach us that ballet is a universal language that speaks to us fervently, urgently, and eloquently, without the need to utter a single word. In that sense, ballet is an art with an unparalleled ability to reveal and illuminate the inner workings, fears, and yearnings of the human heart. And this makes Romeo and Juliet a ballet you do not simply see. It is a ballet you experience. Thank you for joining me for Behind the Ballet with Elizabeth Kaye.